In the midst of first-class luxury, an unexpected encounter with Snoop Dogg ignites a confrontation that leaves everyone on board speechless and transforms one man's life forever. Welcome to Stories of Justice, where every tale uncovers powerful lessons about humanity and respect. If this story moved you, hit the like button, subscribe for more inspiring narratives, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The New York City airport buzzed with its usual hustle and bustle. People hurried through the terminals, conversations overlapping and luggage rolling in every direction. Amidst the chaos, Snoop Dogg stood calmly in the first-class line. He carried a sleek backpack that hinted at countless journeys, yet his presence was anything but flashy. Perhaps because of his understated appearance, he went unnoticed by many. However, those who took a closer look could sense something different about him. It wasn't just his attire, but the tranquility he radiated. He seemed like someone who remained unruffled by the surrounding chaos, unlike the rushed and anxious passengers around him. Snoop observed everything with a serene demeanor, seemingly soaking in the moment without minding the glances or the stark contrast between himself and the other travelers. Right behind him in the line was Marcus Bennett. Marcus was the complete opposite of Snoop. He donned an expensive suit, polished shoes, and a cologne that demanded attention. Every movement he made appeared rehearsed, as though he wanted the world to recognize his importance. His eyes quickly scanned the line, and when they landed on Snoop, he couldn't hold back his comment. "First class, huh?" Marcus remarked with an ironic smile. "You never know who might show up here these days." Snoop turned his head and looked at him, maintaining his calm expression. "Yeah, the world's full of surprises." Marcus frowned for a moment, expecting a bigger reaction, something that would confirm his preconceived notions about the man in front of him. But Snoop remained silent, as if Marcus's comment didn't matter. Deciding to push further, Marcus continued. "Look, nothing personal, but you don't seem like the type who flies like this," he said, chuckling softly. "It's rare to see someone so casual in first class." The moment to board arrived, and the first-class line began to move forward. Without exchanging any more words, Snoop and Marcus followed, tickets in hand. Marcus walked with firm, confident strides, while Snoop seemed oblivious to the commotion, maintaining his calm pace. Upon reaching his seat, Marcus checked his ticket once more and looked up to see Snoop settling into the seat right next to his. "You've got to be kidding me," Marcus muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. He sat down beside Snoop and let out a low chuckle as if the situation was a joke. Of all the places possible, it had to be here. Snoop simply looked at him with that same tranquil demeanor and gave a slight smile. "Looks like we're traveling together." Marcus crossed his arms, trying to hide his discomfort. It wasn't just the fact that he was sitting next to Snoop, but the realization that the man he had judged moments ago was now sharing the same exclusive space. He couldn't quite explain why, but Snoop's presence unsettled him in a way he couldn't ignore. As the economy-class passengers finished boarding, Marcus decided to strike up a conversation, but not in a friendly way. "So what do you do for a living?" he asked with a casual tone, as if he already thought he knew the answer but wanted confirmation. Snoop, adjusting his backpack under the seat in front of him, looked up and answered simply, "I work in music." Marcus raised his eyebrows as if surprised. "Oh, I see. Entertainment, small-time stuff." Snoop gave a slight smile and shook his head. "Something like that?" Marcus laughed. "I've always found it interesting how people try to find their place, you know? But sometimes, certain spaces just aren't meant for everyone, like first class, for instance." Snoop looked at him for a moment, assessing the situation but maintained his calm demeanor. "I think we all have our place," he replied. "And sometimes it's exactly where we are." Marcus let out a short laugh. "That's nice. Kind of philosophical, even. But real life isn't that simple." Snoop didn't respond immediately. He turned back to the window as if the conversation was over. But Marcus wasn't done yet. "You know what?" Marcus said, leaning slightly toward him. "You might be sitting here, but there are things money can't buy. Some places will never really belong to certain people." This time, Snoop didn't respond with words. He simply looked at Marcus for a moment with an expression that combined patience and a certain firmness. It was the kind of look that said more than any words ever could. Realizing his provocation hadn't had the desired effect, Marcus leaned back into his seat with a satisfied smile. He thought he had the upper hand in the situation, but the truth was that things were only just beginning. Marcus was convinced he was in control, but Snoop's calmness hid something he couldn't foresee. With every passing minute, what seemed like a simple conversation was turning into something much bigger. As the plane was already in the air, the in-flight service began. The flight attendant moved through first class, offering drinks. Marcus made sure to be noticed. "A glass of champagne, please," he said with a confident smile that matched the exclusivity of his seat. The flight attendant, accustomed to demanding passengers, nodded with a professional smile. When it was Snoop's turn, he made a simple request. "Just water, please." Marcus didn't miss the opportunity to comment. He looked at Snoop with that same air of superiority and let out a chuckle. "Water? Don't tell me you're going to waste the experience of flying first class with water." Snoop took the bottle the flight attendant handed him and replied calmly, "I'm good with this. Sometimes simplicity is enough." Marcus narrowed his eyes as if trying to decipher the answer, but quickly decided to push back. "Yeah, I guess that works for people who settle for less. Not everyone is born to enjoy the best life has to offer." Snoop raised the bottle and took a small sip, not responding immediately. Other passengers began to notice Marcus's provocative tone, but since Snoop appeared unbothered, no one intervened. "Maybe the best is different for everyone," Snoop finally said with the same calmness as always. Marcus didn't like the answer. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain control of the conversation. Or maybe he was seeing people who say that just never had access to what really matters. The flight attendant serving another passenger cast a discreet glance in their direction, as if considering stepping in. But she noticed Snoop was handling the situation well. Snoop responded with nothing more than a slight smile, turning back to look out the window. Marcus, on the other hand, didn't seem satisfied. He wanted to provoke more, but was beginning to realize that Snoop was a difficult opponent to rattle. Marcus was convinced he was winning the dispute, but the passengers around them found his arrogance increasingly uncomfortable, while Snoop remained calm. Marcus was about to face a reality that would completely change his views on people. The flight attendant returned to their section of the cabin as she served another round of drinks. Determined to win the debate he had started, Marcus continued, "You know, life is like flying first class." He gestured with his champagne glass. "You work hard, earn your spot, and then you get to enjoy it. But some people, well, it seems like they're only here because they got lucky." Snoop placed his water bottle on the seat tray and finally turned to face Marcus. His gaze was calm, but there was something different in it now, as if he was ready to respond more directly. "Luck or hard work, we all end up in the same place when the flight lands, don't we?" Snoop said, his tone serene but firm. The passengers around them, who had been discreetly observing, began to pay closer attention. The cabin grew almost uncomfortably silent. A few exchanged glances, noticing the subtle clash between the two. Marcus smiled, clearly trying to hide that the response had hit him in some way. "Well, I wouldn't say some of us are simply on a higher level. Not everyone understands the value of being here." Snoop leaned forward slightly, crossing his arms. "I think the value of being here," he gestured around the seat, "isn't about what you have, but how you treat others." The phrase hung in the air like an undeniable truth. Some passengers nodded slightly, while others exchanged approving glances. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed uncomfortable. He tried to laugh it off. "That's a good one. First-class self-help philosophy. Maybe you should consider giving motivational talks." Snoop simply gave a short smile and turned back to face forward, ending the conversation without saying anything more. His calmness seemed to speak louder than any words. The passengers around them began to react subtly. Some whispered to one another, while others looked at Marcus with disapproving expressions. A couple sitting a few rows behind, who appeared to recognize Snoop, remained silent, respecting his privacy but clearly admiring the way he handled the situation. Meanwhile, Marcus began to notice he was being watched, and not in a positive way. His once confident posture began to shift slightly, but he still wasn't ready to admit he had lost control. Convinced he was winning, he pressed on. "It's easy for you to say. The world is competitive. If you don't show what you have, people will ignore you. That's just how things work." Snoop leaned back in his seat and replied calmly, "Maybe, but I think true success doesn't need to be shouted about. It speaks for itself." Or Marcus's frustration was evident as he struggled to find a response. "That's easy for you to say," he retorted, almost rising from his seat. "You don't know anything about me? You don't know what I've been through to get here." Snoop responded firmly, but without raising his voice. "You're right, I don't know your story. But I don't think I need to know it to see that sometimes when someone feels the need to shout about what they've achieved, it's because they're trying to hide something. Fear, insecurity, loneliness." The statement hit Marcus unexpectedly. He froze, his face flushed with anger and perhaps shame. He clenched his fists, clearly struggling to contain an outburst. Finally losing his composure, Marcus stood up abruptly, knocking his empty champagne glass to the floor. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted, drawing the attention of everyone in the cabin. "Sitting there with your clever little phrases, acting like you know everything about life, but you don't know a thing about what it's like to live in the real world." The passengers fell silent, shocked by Marcus's outburst. The flight attendant quickly approached, trying to defuse the situation. Snoop remained seated, looking at Marcus calmly. He waited for the man to finish speaking before responding. "I don't think I'm better than you. I just think that sometimes we need to stop and think about what really matters. And Marcus, you don't have to prove anything to anyone." Marcus was breathing heavily, but something in Snoop's voice made him sit down again. He averted his gaze, looking more defeated than angry. Marcus sat in silence, Snoop's words echoing in his mind. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable in front of so many people, but he still didn't know that the worst, or perhaps the best, was yet to come. The flight continued in a heavier silence after the confrontation. Marcus remained in his seat, avoiding looking at Snoop, but it was evident he was deeply unsettled. Snoop, on the other hand, seemed completely relaxed, as if nothing had happened. A short while later, the flight attendant approached Snoop with a polite smile. Her voice caught the attention of the entire cabin. "Mr. Dogg," she said, "the captain asked me to inform you that your connection in Tokyo is confirmed. He also sends his best regards." The name Dogg seemed to echo through first class. Some passengers who had been quietly observing widened their eyes, and a murmur began to spread through the cabin. That's when Marcus froze. "Dogg," he murmured, almost in disbelief. Snoop nodded politely to the flight attendant and thanked her, not paying much attention to the commotion. He turned to Marcus, who now looked at him as if he were seeing a ghost. "Is something wrong, Marcus?" Snoop asked with a slight smile. Marcus opened his mouth but couldn't form a sentence. He looked around, noticing other passengers observing him with curious and in some cases disapproving glances. He looked completely lost. Marcus sank into his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He began mumbling a few words, trying to justify his actions. "I had no idea. I mean, you didn't say who you were." Snoop kept his tone calm, but there was firmness in his words. "I didn't think it was necessary. I don't usually use my name as a calling card." Marcus remained silent for a moment before attempting to defend himself. "Look, I didn't mean to offend you. I just didn't know who I was talking to." Snoop let out a small sigh and leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, what you said doesn't change just because you now know my name. The truth doesn't depend on who you're speaking to. It depends on how you choose to treat people." The words left Marcus speechless. He looked at Snoop, then at the other passengers who now seemed even more attentive to what was unfolding. The humiliation on his face was undeniable. The silence in the cabin was broken by Snoop, who decided to conclude the conversation with a final lesson. "Marcus, life is hard enough for everyone. The last thing we need is people trying to put others down to make themselves feel bigger." Marcus nodded slightly, unable to argue for the first time. He seemed to genuinely reflect on his actions. Snoop leaned back in his seat, effectively ending the conversation. Meanwhile, Marcus remained motionless, staring at his hands as if replaying every word in his mind. He wasn't just confronted by Snoop, but by reality itself. He began to realize that in his attempt to humiliate someone else, he had revealed more about himself than he ever intended. The rest of the flight was marked by a heavy silence. Marcus, who once seemed like he owned the space, now looked visibly uncomfortable. He could barely meet the eyes of Snoop or the other passengers. The arrogance he carried at the start of the journey had disappeared, replaced by something much closer to shame. As the minutes passed, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Snoop's words. Everything he had said seemed so simple, yet at the same time it struck deeply. Marcus began questioning his own behavior, recalling how many times he had judged people without even trying to know them. Maybe he's right, he murmured to himself. Without realizing it, he glanced at Snoop, who was calmly reading a book as if nothing had happened. This only amplified the impact of the situation. Snoop hadn't made any effort to prove himself. He had simply let his actions speak for him. As the plane began to prepare for landing, Marcus finally mustered the courage to say something. He turned to Snoop, his eyes still lowered, and said, "I need to apologize. Not for what I said, just because you're you, but because I was arrogant. I acted like an idiot." Snoop looked at him, his expression as tranquil as ever. He waited a moment before responding. "I appreciate the apology, but more than that, I hope you learn from this." Marcus nodded slowly, realizing that those words were an opportunity for change. Snoop continued, "Sometimes what we search for most in the world is what we find least within ourselves. I hope you figure out what really matters." Marcus remained silent, but Snoop's words stayed in his mind. He knew that moment had the potential to change something inside him if he allowed it. After disembarking, Marcus stood still in the terminal, watching Snoop walk away. He saw fans discreetly approach him to greet him and take pictures. Snoop greeted each one with patience and a genuine smile, without haste or arrogance. It was evident that his simplicity and kindness came from within. Marcus looked down at his own hands and sighed. He knew he needed to change. Snoop's words still echoed in his mind, a reminder that a person's true worth isn't about their status, but about how they choose to treat others. As Snoop disappeared into the airport crowd, Marcus felt something new: hope. Maybe that encounter hadn't been a coincidence. Maybe it was a chance to start over. As news of the incident on the flight spread, it resonated deeply within the community. Social media buzzed with discussions about humility, respect, and the true meaning of success. People began sharing their own stories of judgment and redemption, inspired by Marcus's transformation. Community centers and schools incorporated these lessons into their programs, emphasizing the importance of looking beyond appearances and valuing each individual's journey. Local businesses started promoting values of kindness and genuine interaction, realizing that fostering a respectful environment not only improves personal relationships, but also strengthens the community as a whole. Workshops and seminars on emotional intelligence and empathy saw increased participation, encouraging individuals to understand and manage their own insecurities. The story of Snoop Dogg and Marcus Bennett became a powerful reminder that true change begins with self-reflection and the courage to admit one's faults. It taught people that real success isn't measured by material wealth or social status, but by the positive impact one has on others and the ability to grow from one's mistakes. This narrative fostered a culture of compassion and resilience, inspiring many to strive for personal growth and to support one another in their journeys towards becoming better individuals. In the end, the encounter between Snoop Dogg and Marcus Bennett highlighted a universal truth. Respect and humility are timeless virtues that can transform lives and communities. It encouraged everyone to start with themselves, making conscious choices to treat others with kindness and understanding, thereby creating a more harmonious and empathetic world. Disclaimer: all stories shared on this channel are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. We advocate for a world where everyone has equal rights under the law and where society continues to grow in fairness, development, and civilization. Our goal is to share heartwarming stories that contribute to making life better. Any resemblance to real events, individuals, or organizations is purely coincidental and unintentional. These stories are not meant to reference any actual people, events, or entities, and contain no political or religious connotations.